Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's session, we are going to talk about Power Automate interview questions. So a few weeks back, I created one interview question related to Power Apps, and it was given a very well response from our viewers, and it was requested to create the same crash course for our Power Automate. So I'm here with the Power Automate interview questions. So I'll just just jump into the questions. So I have collected almost 20 questions which we are going to discuss with the answers, and as well as in the end of the session I'll be giving you a few tips and tricks to work effectively with the flows with the Power Automate. So let's jump with the questions. So first question is, what is Power Automate and what can you do with Power Automate? So it's a basic question to understand your knowledge about what is Power Automate and what in what scenario you can use the Power Automate. So you can simply answer that Power Automate is a cloud service inside M365 or Office 365, which actually gives you flexibility to interact with all other service lines. So it actually works as a glue within the M365. As you might be knowing that Office Graph is the base underlying platform for connecting each and every object within the M365. So this Power Automate would be acting as a glue which can just read out or receive the notifications from any of the app or any of the service line within M365 and pass on the data based on that trigger to different service lines to work or to change the behavior based on the action taken. So what you can do with the Power Automate? So with Power Automate, you can receive the notifications, you can update the items, create the files, and you can also interact with the different service lines which are outside of this M365 world. And when I say outside, that means like these are external connectors. For example, connecting to Salesforce, connecting to social media, Facebook login, Facebook connectors, or possibly connecting to Slack. So there are more than 260 connectors which are available and which allow us to make an interaction with the data underlying under M365 and as well as the outside interface with the third parties. So let's jump to the second question. Why doesn't Microsoft want SharePoint Designer for workflows, and why Flow in Office 365? So as I said, Microsoft's roadmap is to maintain and build on top of M365. So Designer workflow was used to be pretty much centralized with the SharePoint, and we were able to create the processes within the SharePoint only. It can't interact outside of the SharePoint. Now with M365 or O365, we have the broader synergy environment where we can just have something in Power Platform which can interact with the SharePoint, and in turn which can also interact with the teams. So to make that entire collaborative environment, this Power Automate would be the key. So third question is, what is pricing structure of Power Automate? So right now we are in August 2020, so I am explaining you the pricing structure which is right now, which Microsoft has given, is per user license and the per flow license, and per user license with the attended and the unattended. So there are basically three structures they have created. Per user, so that means like number of license would be based on the per users which you are which you are buying from Microsoft. And the second would be the number of flows. So minimum you have to have the 5 flows in your environment if you are going with a per flow license. And the third would be per user with the attended RPAs. So that's a recent structure which they have launched. So if you are watching this video in future, then possibly you can look out the latest flow pricing structure to update your information. So fourth question is types of Microsoft flows. So what are the various types of flows we can create under the Power Automate? So first is automated flow. So as the name suggests, that it will trigger automatically based on some event which happened within the M365 suite. So for example, if you are creating any SharePoint item, or if you are uploading any file, or you are posting any message under the MS Teams, or possibly you are receiving an email from a specific email address. All this could actually work as trigger conditions for the automated flows, and there could be many more. So when you actually explore what different connectors or what different triggers could be there, then you would find that there are many more trigger conditions. Second is button flows. So button flow as practically get called whenever some manual action or some button clicking should happen. So for example, you are creating one Power App, and in that Power App you want user to submit any data based on button click. Then you will be just simply bind up that button click with the PowerAutomate, and whenever somebody clicks that button in Power Apps, then the flow should trigger. And you can, based on your requirement, you can pass on the parameters as well, which can be captured or read out in flow going forward. So third type would be scheduled flows. These type of flows actually gets called in a particular time. So when I say a particular time, then, so if you have worked on timer jobs, then possibly you must be aware that some action or some bunch of commands get executed in a specific interval of time, possibly days, week, monthly, based on whatever trigger you are deciding. So these are the same scheduled flows where you can just simply bind up with a time that it should happen on this date specifically, or every week, or every minute, or every hour. Then this would get triggered based on your requirement. The fourth type of flows are business process flows. So these are pretty interesting. So these are basically the stages flows. So possibly, like with the starting stage, you would be capturing few fields. Consider an example where you want to capture the expense detail for a particular event or for a particular function in your company, and then you want that captured data to be passed on to the next stage, to the account department, where they can just review those details, and based on the approvals of that specific department and some automatic condition, for example, expense is more than $1,000, then it should go for another level of approval. Otherwise, it will be just get into the final state. So these are pretty much stage basis flows, and generally we are tying up this with the modern driven apps. And the final one is the UI flows. So these are still in preview, but very interesting ones. So in UI flows, we have sort of two types, as these are part of RPA. So under the RPA, there are two types: attended and unattended. So when I say attended, that means whatever action you are doing on your screen, that would be captured under flow. And if you want that entire process to happen in future, then you not to worry about doing the same steps by manually, but you can just run that UI flow. So that would require a bit of human interaction. For example, opening some browser or clicking somewhere, then that's called attended flow. And consider other scenario where you are doing bulk processing of something, for example, calculating some accounting information, and on a daily basis, or that's a pretty much, like automated thing where you don't want any human interaction or the manual interaction, then that would be called as RPAs unattended. So this type of flows would be actually tied up with a different pricing structure. So if you want to go into details, then you can just look for the details pricing structure for these RPAs. Moving to the next question, that what is action and trigger in MS flow. So there is in a flow, everything actually starts with one trigger. So something should happen which can notify that flow that now you should be doing this bunch of behaviors. And what are those bunch of behaviors? We call them as actions. So actions are something which actually user want to happen whenever some event gets triggered. So this is how you can explain this entire action and trigger question. So sixth question onwards, we would be digging more into the PowerAutomate detailed stuff. So sixth question is, can we pause the flow? How long can flow run? And can we kill it? So it's pretty much not the question to a developer, but more or less like to the power user. So can we pause the flow? By button click, we can't. Though we have mechanism by editing the flow and just have the do until with one delay condition where you want to pause the flow in a specific do until loop. So you can do that, but with a user, by just one click you can't pause it, a running flow. How long can flow runs? So this is basically question related to, so if my flow is running, let's say it's one of the approval flow is running for a few days, then how long it would be keep on running? So I would say right now the limitation is of 30 days. So if your action is in pending for last 30 days, then it will automatically get timed out. So your approval flow would stop working if it passed 30 days, or any other action would stop working, would get time off it past 30 days. Can we kill it? Yes, we can kill or cancel the running instance of any flow. So going to this question 7, is it possible to access REST web services API from this platform? Yes, definitely we can do that. So for that we would be taking help of custom connectors. We can create the custom connectors which would be making a REST calls with some specified payload and would be doing all the REST operations. And as well as we have this one trigger, that is when an HTTP request received. So this sort of triggers are well within the limit of flows. We can work with that. So how you can share the flow with your team members? So there's a pretty configuration stuff. So if you just log into your my flows, then you would see a tab for the teams, and you can simply share that flow with your team, so that even after you are not more within your organization or your environment, then possibly your team members could keep on working on that. So 9th question is, why my flow send notification using my mail ID? So this is pretty interesting question, because these are generic question which we actually receive from power users, that if I am creating flow, why it keep on sending, why it actually use my email ID to send out a notification. So the answer is straightforward, because it's meant for the power users only. So it's meant to increase the efficiency of your day-to-day work. So that's why it's using your connector. But if you are a developer and you want that flow to do some business logic, not to increase the productivity of yourself, but defining some business BPM process for your user, then you should be going for a service account rather than using your account. And that service account should be email enabled, so that it is capable of sending out the email notification. Right? And the other approach could be for sending the emails. You can use the shared mailboxes, and the current user should be the owner of that mailbox. So there are two approaches of doing that. Then coming to the 10th question, how to access more than 100 items to get items, action, or files? So if you are a PowerAutomate developer, then this is the most common question you would be having if you are working on number of items which are more than 100. And the reason of limitation is that by default REST only returns 100 items. So that's pretty much limitation. But how to overcome that limitation? So with get item action, we can specify the paging, and in a single page what number of items you want to have, then it will keep on giving us in the those items in a one single page. And for more than 100 items, let's say 1000 items, it will create the 10 pages, and so that we can just read out all the items from it. So you can use the paging with get items, and with the files you can specify your OData query with a top count. For example, you can specify top count of 5000 if you want to retrieve 5000 item from this document library. So that's how you can overcome that 100 items limitation. And with 11th question is, my apply to each loop stops after 1 hour. Still, though like my do until condition does not satisfy. So here what interviewer would like to understand, why it's happening that my do until loop stop working after few iterations or after 1 hour. So the answer is, if you check under your do until loop configuration, the timeout setting would be there, because we can't have any loop to work infinitely. Like if by some manual error the loop exit condition doesn't satisfy, it should not just clog the server. It should not create the infinite loop or consume all the quota which is defined with these flows. So that's why some predefined these timeout conditions are being set with these every actions. So if your do until loop is stopping after a few minutes or few hours, then you should be checking your configuration under your do until loop, that what is the timeout condition specified. So generally the formula for that timeout is PTH. So P1H, that means, so your action would be timeout after 1, hour, and if it's P1D, then your action would be timeout after 1 day. So you should be uh, uh, considerable about that thing. Like if you want your do until loop to work for next 30 days, then be sure that you are setting up that timeout condition correctly. Now going to the question 12, what is an on-premise gateway and how we can configure it? So here interview would like to understand, or the broader question would be how you can, because PowerAutomate is a cloud service, how you can interact the data which is inside your on-premise environment, inside your data center. So for that you have to configure the on-premise gateways, and these are nothing but would actually like one exe which would run on your servers, and will create one configuration so that it can bypass the firewall for that specific connection. So it's a pretty standard steps which you can just find it out, like how to configure the on-premise gateway. But the answer is simple. Yes, you can have the interaction between your within your intranet. For example, SQL, which is your on-premise data center, which is on your on-premise data center, then you can just interact with the SQL database and can have the data in your cloud service as well. The question 13, how to move flow to a different environment. So it's a deployment question. Interview would like to understand on how actually you are maintaining your versions and how you are actually like moving the deployables from one environment to another environment. So you can just simply export your flow, whatever you have created, and it will give you one zip file, and in a different environment you just need to import that zip file, and of course you have to update the connections while moving the environments. Question 14, can we delete the default owner of flow? Okay, so the question is related to if I'm in one of the organization, I've created one flow, and if I left, then how my name can be removed from it. So right now, by default from the UI, we can't remove any owner. We have to have this flow either created with service account so that my entire team can open and share it, edit this, or it has to be shared with the teams, with the team members. So be mindful, like if you are creating any flow and you are just having yourself as owner, then possibly if in future you are not anymore with the organization, then it would be pain like to move that. So possibly like with the admin thing, with a partial, we would able to change the owners and the environment, but that's some administrative job. Going to the question number 15, what are scopes in flow? How to use them? So possibly an interesting question, because if you are new to the flows, then possibly you might not be aware about the scopes. What are scopes? So scopes actually provides us a way to bind up all the actions within one box. And consider if you are having a coding background, then you must be aware that we used to handle the exceptions or do the error handling using try and catch blocks. The scopes provides the same mechanism, same flexibility for us to capture the try and catch thing. So for example, if I'm binding three of my actions in one scope, and 3 action could be just reading out one list item, and based on that list item I would be creating one file in my OneDrive, and if that file creation fails, then what should happen? If that file creation got succeed, then what should happen? If that file creation got succeed, let's say I would like to share the file path with my couple of users, then I can simply send out the email with that file path. But what if the creation of that entire file creation scopes get failed? Then it should retry, or it should say that this has failed due to this condition. Now you will be sending out email for the failure, possibly to the admin, to look in more detail about the error. So this gives you a flexibility of specifying what should be done if the scope fails, and what should be done if the action succeed. And you can also specify that what should be running after it. So there is a configure run after. So that means like if this action happens, then the other action should run irrespective of the failures. So going to the question 16, what are timeouts and retry policy for action. So timeout, I have already explained that with each and every actions, specifically with the looping stuff, we should be mindful that what the timeout configuration are done, because we might not want to time out if my flow is still running. So that timeout already told you that it's in our day. It's a pretty format predefined format are there, so you can have a look on that. And the retry policy, so per the flow limitation, so right now the retry policy actually tries for 30, not 30, I believe 90 times, and I believe like it's every 2 seconds the time period. We can just have a look on it, but it's a pretty limited. Their limitation on retry policy. If something is getting failed, I mean like creation of a file getting failed, then how many times that policy should try, that action should try to recreate it again. So that number, that configuration, you can specify within your action itself in the configuration part. So if you just click on 3 dots on your action, it will give you all the context menu, and then you can just click on settings. So that will give you the timeout setting of it. So what is configure run after setting? So I have just explained you while explaining that in scopes. So jumping to the question 18, how to do parallel processing flows. So it's an interesting question, because as flow is pretty much sequential way. So as though I explained that in BPMs we can have stages and we can just move between the stages, but in the normal flow we pretty much go in the sequential fashion from top to down. And if you want to have the parallel branch to be executed in the simultaneously, how can be that done? So we can create the parallel branches. There is an option of, if you click on the dot on the right hand side of any action, then it will give you option to create a parallel branch. But what if you want to create the parallel branch at the runtime? So for that you would be using the apply to each loop, which actually loops between all the iterate and do the bunch of actions within the apply to each. And if you go to the configuration of that apply to each, you would be seeing a setting for concurrency, and there you can specify the concurrency level. For example, if you want to create task for number of users, and that number of users are dynamic property, then you would be just defining how many times that apply to each should run, and all the tasks would be created parallelly if you set the configuration level as concurrency and enable that concurrency level, and give the count against the concurrency level, what number of concurrency should be there. So that's how you can create the parallel processing in flows. So that's actually also a tip. If you're working on a number of files or number of records, then it's better for the faster processing, you should be specifying that as a parallel processing. 19, limitation of and challenges of flows. So as we have been discussing about few limitations. For example, sending out emails. So if you want to send out the emails with specific user, then use the service account or shared mailbox. And there are limitations with the history which is being saved for any flow run, with by defaults right now is 28 days history only. You can see the number of tries for each action. By default you can't have more than 90 retries. And with the timeouts, maximum timeout you can have for any action is of 30 days. And we have limitations related to the message size per flow, which is 100 MB. And there are limitations related to apply to each iteration, so we can maximum have 5,000 iterations in apply to each. And the concurrency level limitation is of 50. So the parallelism of any apply to each loop would be maximum 50. And number of actions which can be there in a flow is maximum 500. And related to the action execution time per minute is 2000. So these are pretty standard limits which you can just go to the flow site. It's good to know the product before using, so that you should able to understand or give the solutions based on the requirement, and as well as understanding the limitation of the product. So 20th question would be, can I call up PowerAutomate from other PowerAutomate and any real-time scenario for such requirement? So here interviewer would like to understand that how much the design practices you follows actually while building any flow. So for example, you would like to bifurcate the common logic from some the multiple trigger conditions in a child flow. Then how you would able to do that? So yes, we can call a PowerAutomate from other PowerAutomate. We can keep the triggers under the parent flows and the common complex logic inside one of the child flow, and that parent flow can call the child flow, so that the concept of reusability can be maintained. And if we are changing some logic, then it should be just changing a logic in one single flow, not touching the entire flow or making it more complex. So we just discussed a few important questions which actually interviewer may ask to check your understanding or your expertise level related to PowerAutomate. But now I would like to give you few tips and tricks would help you to create the flows in your organization better and effective manner. So first tip is copy actions. So these are pretty handy for me. So second is use scopes which act as try and catch blocks. As I explained you, so scope does give us that flexibility. If something gets failed, then you should be calling some some other set of actions, and if something gets succeed, then you should be calling or doing some other operation. And the third is readable and understandable actions. So that means you should be keeping a simple name so that which can be understandable, because if your flow is getting more complex and then doing some updates to it would be a pain. So it's better to just have your actions name per your actions behavior so that it can be easily identified. Fourth is use concurrency for loop. So you should be always, like if you are working with apply to each loop or do until, then just do a concurrency, just make that happen or work in parallel so that it could be faster. It would be a performance effective stuff. Fifth is avoid variables, use compose. So instead of initializing variable and setting variable, you can simply use compose, and which can be used in further your actions and which would be pretty quick. And always use filter actions. So if you are working on specific type of items or files only, then just create a OData query so that it can just result into whatever stuff you would like to work. Know the limitations. So as I said, you should be knowing the limitations of the product very well before constructing any flow, so that whatever is expected, you should be able to deliver that. Reusability. So reusability, we can work with the reusability flow calling another flow. That means moving the complex logic in a child flow and the simpler logic with the trigger conditions in the parent flows. So that's how you can segregate the complex to non-complex requirement or make it more reusable. So I hope that's the end of this video. So you may like this session and may also like this tip and tricks to which can help you to work better in PowerAutomate. That's it for today. Thank you.